Let's see, introduce Teya Penniman. Teya Penniman is really excited to have her speak. She started her conservation career studying land birds and seabirds and marine mammals. She's great to go birding with because she recognizes everything, specifically seabirds. It's pretty amazing. She worked on some remote islands, including the Farallon Islands off the coast of California. She has graduate degrees in management and law and worked as an assistant attorney general in Oregon before she moved to Maui. Teya was a manager of MISC for 14 years, and then she joined the Birds Not Mosquitoes program. They're working to save imperiled honey creepers from extinction. You may also recognize her name from Maui no Ko'oi and other local publications. She writes for the environment and culture and is a reporter at UN conferences on the environment and mediates agricultural disputes in Hawaii. So we're really excited to have her and have her present on her work, the work of the Birds Not Mosquitoes program.
Thanks, Lissa.
Yes, thank you.
Go ahead and share my screen. Okay, there we are. So it's a real pleasure to be here in the community of people who have been working for a long time to protect our special places, not only on Maui, but also on other islands. And I know some of you folks are here. I see you on the attendee list, so thank you for all your good work. And as Lissa said, I've worked on invasive species for quite a while, and I guess I just can't say no to a really challenging project. So about a year and a half ago, I joined the statewide project called Birds Not Mosquitoes, and that is a team of people who are working to halt or slow the spread of avian malaria in Hawaii on a landscape scale to prevent our native forest birds from going extinct. So today I'm going to be talking a little bit about our forest birds. Laura gave a great overview of that, mosquitoes, avian malaria, and then in particular, the project that we are doing. So just briefly, when you think of honey creepers, which is what of course comes to mind when you're thinking of endemic birds here in Hawaii, one of the things anyway, what do you think of? I think most people think Evie is that classic honey creeper with the long, deep curved bill and the bright red plumage. But of course, that's not the only one. And as Laura pointed out, she walked us through the original colonizers, that Asian rosy finch, and then all the adaptive radiation that then led to this wonderful diversity of bill types and all of the different things that those birds eat and the habitats that they use. One of the things that I really want to focus or just highlight in this history is that those birds and their ancestors, at any rate, have been here for about 6 million years. So remember that, because I'll refer to that a little bit later. And then the other thing is that at one time, there were as many as 56 different honey creeper species here in the Hawaiian Islands. We are now down to 17, including the Northwest Hawaiian Islands. So we've lost nearly 40 species of honey creepers over that time. So what's the current status in the islands? Of those, only 9 are considered threatened or endangered, 3 are vulnerable or declining, and only 3 of them are in what we would call stable numbers. So that's a really precarious situation for our honey creepers. Those numbers and the status of some of the birds varies by island. For example, the iconic Evie is declining on the island of Kauai. So for our different honey creeper species, as Laura pointed out, some of them are really quite on the edge. The two Akikiki and Akekee on Kauai are in very low numbers. And then on Maui, the Kiwikiu and the Akohekohi are the most endangered. Honey creepers are not our only forest birds that are endangered. There's also the Alapaio and the Pueohi. So we have some thrushes and the Alapaio as well, which is a moderate flycatcher. And as also been pointed out, our forest birds are integral, not only integral components of healthy forests, but they are also really a central part of our Hawaiian culture. And Laura did it, and Serena and others have made that connection very nicely. One of the things that I really like to do is to imagine what it must have been like for those first voyagers when they arrived in the islands, and they would have been greeted by an amazing assemblage of colorful birds, different plumages, and all of those songs. I really love that Laura shared the different songs for us. As I closed my eyes at that point and tried to imagine all of them singing, chirping at once, as they would have been in the long ago, in the early days. But it's also important to recognize that birds are not the only example of adaptive radiation and endemism here in the islands. We have more than 10,000 native species, and 6,000 of those are endemics found nowhere else in the world. I want to point out the two images on the right. Those are taken by Zach Pizzillo, who works for Maui Forest Bird Recovery Project. So they have some great staff, including some awesome photographers. And the one on the left is the Vicu bug, and I'll return to that in a bit, found up on our highest mountains. So what about mosquitoes? Not a single one of those 10,000 native insects was a mosquito. We have no native mosquitoes in Hawaii. We do, however, have 6 biting mosquitoes. And if you have the unfortunate experience of being awakened at night by a buzzing, hungry mosquito that seems to be seeking you like a heat-seeking torpedo, that is likely to be the Culex. So it's a night biter, and it's more common than the other night biter that we're likely to encounter. Interestingly enough, also, Culex was the first mosquito species known to arrive in the islands back in somewhere around 1826. Actually, not somewhere, it's pegged quite specifically because it's understood that it came in on the Wellington ship, which was either a trading or a whaling vessel. So we know really how long mosquitoes have been here. So what do we know about the southern house mosquito, as it's called, Culex cucufasciatus? It is a subtropical species. It is now found on all the Hawaiian Islands. It feeds on humans, birds, and other animals, but is characterized as being ornithophilic, which is, as it sounds like, it loves birds. It doesn't just love birds, it really likes to feed on them, which is where our problem comes from. A female will lay about 300 to 400 eggs in a raft that floats on water. And it doesn't take much water, as Laura mentioned. In the forest, it can be just small pockets, or even in the crook of a fern. So the eggs will hatch in just a couple of days, and the larval and pupal stages take 8 to 10 days. So a complete life cycle can occur in 2 weeks to a month. The adults live from anywhere from 2 weeks to a couple of months. Females tend to live longer, and the female can lay successive eggs of rafts, but she needs a blood meal every time. However, she also can store sperm, so she really only needs to mate one time. But then every time she wants to lay an egg rafts, she will be finding a blood source. So if you do the math, in just a couple of months, one female can produce between 1,200 and 1,500 eggs. But our concern is really mostly about what the female transmit when she goes for that blood meal. And a number of factors have, as we've heard, a number of factors have contributed to the decimation of our forest birds, but the number one threat to their survival now is avian malaria. Plasmodium relictum is a microscopic parasite. The basic takeaway from this diagram is that Plasmodium needs to infect two different hosts, both an insect, in this case the mosquito, and a vertebrate, or the bird, in this case, to complete its reproductive process. But it's the mosquito, the vector, that actively passes along the parasite and hence the infection through its salivary glands when it bites the bird. Elsewhere in the world, and even in Hawaii, many bird species have developed immunity to the parasite, so it doesn't kill them. Unfortunately, our endemic birds, forest birds, are what we call naive hosts, or honey creepers, or their ancestors, as I mentioned earlier, have been in the islands for 6 million years. But the mosquito, only for a couple hundred years, and Plasmodium, really only for 100 years. So that just hasn't been enough time for most of our species to develop immunity or resistance to this disease. Some, as Laura mentioned, some of our forest birds we're seeing again in lower elevation, like the amakihi. But for others, like the eevee and probably the kiwi-kiu, a single bite from an infected mosquito can kill the bird. Laura had a great graphic. I love that graphic showing the malarial zones and the movement of the mosquitoes up into the higher elevation. I'd like to get a copy of that. Just the same concept there, that a warming forests are pushing the mosquitoes higher into the last refugia for our forest birds. Mosquito surveys on Hawaii and here on Maui are finding the mosquitoes at higher densities and in new elevations where they have not previously been found before. One of the other things that I want to highlight is this information about how many birds we have and their status, and the information about the mosquitoes and the prevalence of avian malaria. That work, that understanding is based on decades of work, decades of research on all of those different topics. So our observations and our concern is based on really solid science. So what to do? In 2016, there was a gathering of state, national, and international experts brought together to consider what do we do to address this issue. And after a 2-day workshop, they identified the most promising solutions, which are laid out in that document that's on the left there, to restore a mosquito-free Hawaii. And they identified, as I said, the most promising solutions. And the answer for our forest birds was a common bacteria, which sounds sort of surprising. So, so we're all aware that life is a balancing act, and especially these days with COVID raging through our world, and that we live in alliance with, and sometimes in defense from, various microbes, which have dominated the earth for billions of years. Humans alone carry an estimated 10,000 species of bacteria. So we know we have our own microbiomes, and that they differ from one another depending on what we eat and where we live and who we hang out with. But it turns out that one of those bacteria that we carry is not Wolbachia. Wolbachia prefers arthropods, so spiders, insects, crustaceans, and it's super common. It's found in up to 60% of all insect species in the world. It is present in Hawaii in our insect species, including native species, including leafhoppers, seed bugs like the vecu bug, and in Drosophila, or fruit flies, which are its own amazing example of adaptive radiation here in the islands. So we know basically it's here, and it's a master manipulator. It has and establishes its existence here and elsewhere in the world by by manipulating the reproduction of their hosts. It picks as its living site in the cells in the sex cells of the insects that it inhabits. So Wolbachia has been of interest to scientists since at least the 1920s, when it was first discovered. And one of the reasons for that is because of its potential to be used to, for our benefit, and in particular to regulate populations of those species that it inhabits. So I want to walk you through this diagram here. I love that, the graphic, the video that Laura played. That's just a wonderful description of it. So just to go a little bit deeper into it, what we have here at the on the upper left here. So these here are mosquitoes that neither the male nor the female has Wolbachia. And if they mate, they're going to produce viable offspring that also don't have Wolbachia. If you have a mating between a male and a female that both have the same strain of Wolbachia, they will produce viable offspring that carry that strain of Wolbachia. If you have meetings between a female that has Wolbachia and a non-Wolbachia carrying male, offspring are produced. And that's because Wolbachia is maternally transmitted, maternally inherited. So if she's got it, her offspring are going to have it. If you have a mating between a female that doesn't have it and a male that does have it, no eggs. And so they produce eggs, but they don't hatch. They're not viable. And so that's really where we're focusing our effort, is in this last area here. But it's also true that it's not just if the female doesn't have it and the male does. You also get the same result if they have different strains of Wolbachia. And so that's really what we're going for in our project. So how does that work in terms of how do you go about getting that? And what we're doing, the place that our project is right now, is that we have shipped off, we collectively, this is actually a project funded by the US Fish and Wildlife Service, has shipped off eggs of our wild mosquitoes here, our wild culex, to a lab in Michigan State University. And they have injected those, once they bred those out, they established a breeding population. They then take the existing Wolbachia that's in them out by using tetracycline. So just like we would use an antibiotic, tetracycline, often to get rid of a bacterial infection. And then in the lab, they inject those mosquitoes, the adult mosquitoes, with a different strain of Wolbachia. In this case, the strain they're using is one that has come from Aedes albopictus, which is the Asian tiger mosquito that we have here. And they've tested it out. And yes, when a wild female breeds with a male that's been injected with or infected with that different strain, no viable eggs are produced. And so the idea then is that you release only males that have this different strain, and you release them in massive quantities so that you see in the diagram here, so the females are here, and then here are all these wonderful males that they apparently will, that we hope they will choose to breed with. And when they mate, no eggs will be produced, or no viable eggs. And over time, the population will decrease after multiple and sustained releases. Simple, right? Does it work? Well, at least 15 different countries in the world think so, because they are trying Wolbachia-based solutions to mosquito suppression. Some of them are just like the one that I've described, and some have different variations on the theme. But basically, it is a strategy that has been embraced worldwide, and that is working to suppress mosquito populations. So how does what we're doing compare to other work elsewhere in the world? One of the things that's really different and very exciting is that it's for conservation. Every other project is health-based, which of course is awesome. We want to be able to suppress mosquitoes for human health perspectives, but this really is innovative in that no one's tried it for conservation purposes. We're also talking about working in remote forests, not urban applications where you can drive a van down the road and roll down the window and release your males. And as I said, we're for saving birds. And then our support, we have governmental support and NGOs. Health also has Bill Gates, which helps. And we're trying to get his support as well. And actually sponsored a workshop in 2019 that we were able to go to. So our terrain is pretty different from what we would encounter if we were just doing an urban type approach. So one of the really important aspects of our project is that it is a multi-agency approach. And so we have the NGOs on the top, Nature Conservancy, American Bird Conservancy that I work for, Island Conservation, our two forest bird projects on Kauai and Maui, DLNR, National Park Service, Fish and Wildlife Service. USGS provides a lot of great research to help guide us. We're working with the Department of Health because they are also pursuing this approach to be used for Aedes, the University of Hawaii and CGAP's Coordinating Group on Alien Pest Species. So also, how are we doing it? We have regular meetings of our steering committee. We have identified key focal areas, whether it's budget, operations, community engagement, which of course this is part of, and then research. And I just really want to give a shout out to the forest bird projects, Maui Forest Bird. They've been doing this work for a long time, working to try and control the mosquitoes on the ground, and are also super involved in collecting information from the forest, collecting mosquitoes so that we can do the work to find out how related our mosquito populations are in the island so that we can know where best to do our releases and how many are there. There are a lot of questions we have to answer in order to be sure that we're doing a good job. Where are they? How many? Where are they breeding? All of those kinds of questions. So it really is a lot of people involved in this project. And so our current status, I talked about the transinfection at Michigan State University. I said that's complete. We don't have those mosquitoes here in Hawaii yet. We're still working to get an import from HDUA, Department of Agriculture. Even though it's Hawaii mosquitoes in kind we sent them, it's now a little bit different. You know, it's got this enhanced, we think of it as enhanced, but it has this other Wolbachia strain in it. So we have to have a permit to bring our mosquitoes back in. And then there's the whole federal regulatory process. This is treated under the Environmental Protection Agency as a biopesticide because we're using it to suppress, control an insect population. And so we have to go through a very rigorous process to demonstrate that it's effective, it's safe, and then also include the public, the community engagement process as part of that. So we're hoping to be able to have our experimental use permit sometime next year, at which point we would start then doing small scale releases to prove the efficacy of it. And then we're also looking at getting a potential emergency exemption under the EPA regulatory system that could help at least let us do some more work initially while we continue to scale up. And then eventually, hopefully by 2023, we would have our full biopesticide registration. Also just want to point out that we're not the first ones to do this. This system, the regulatory process permitting has been used already for Aedes aegypti and working for Aedes albopictus. So for those other mosquito species, this exists. So it's a known path. And then hoping for landscape scale releases starting in 2024. And as Laura mentioned, our top two islands are going to be Maui and Kauai, just because that's where the risk and the peril is so great right now. So we're also have to figure out, how are we going to get them there? I showed you those images of the forests and the terrain that we're talking about. And so there are people who in the international community who have developed drone applications for releasing them. But again, it varies by mosquito. It turns out all mosquitoes are not alike. And so we have to make sure that not only do we get the right number of mosquitoes in the right place at the right time, we also have to be sure that they're quality mosquitoes. Like, it's not going to do us any good if we release if we go to all that trouble and half of them are dead, or they have some aspect of them, they're not fit, they're not competitive with the wild males that are out there. We want them to come out looking good and attract those females. So the other big key component is our community engagement. Some of our challenges that we have is, of course, our forest birds aren't well known. Thank you, everybody, for helping to get to know them better and for sharing your mana'o and what you've learned and your passion for our place with the rest of our community. It is a really important part of this puzzle. And then, of course, as we also know, many of our forests just aren't that accessible. And then we also have potential opposition. This concept seems simple in theory, it's just mosquito birth control, but it's a little tricky to explain. And the other aspect of that is it's often people just aren't, some people just immediately put up a block when you use the word or the concept anyway of technology in the same sentence as living organisms. And a lot of folks immediately think we're going to make Franken mosquitoes. In fact, this does not involve a genetic approach. We're not messing with the genes of the mosquitoes. But even then, and so a lot of people want to go that route, but and it's not GMO. But some of our well-known and really smart people are looking in Hawaii, are looking at that as a possibility. And that, you know, who's to say that may be somewhere that we go down the path. That's not what our project is doing, but we also don't want to unintentionally communicate that that's a horrible thing in our messaging. So priority audiences, community leaders, Native Hawaiian organizations, I really think about the concept of permission, because our forests don't belong just to us. Our forests initially and still belong to our Kanaka Maoli. And so we need to go, even though we're moving forward, we also need to be sure that we have permission from those we need to seek permission from. And resource users, whether those are hula halau, who are going to harvest for lei, or other traditional practices, hunters, tourists, bird watchers. Resource users are a really critical component of this. Our elected officials, conservation folks. And then, as I mentioned, yes, we need to be talking with potential folks who are potentially opposed to it. So one of the things that I just wanted to highlight in closing is that it is a challenging process. I think a number of us think of it as the conservation challenge of the century. We do believe it's doable, and we also believe it is our best hope for saving these iconic birds from extinction. So thank you for all that you do and all of your efforts to share aloha with the rest of our community, and be happy to take any questions. Thanks. And I can look at them. I can also look at the questions. Okay. Is there any concern that female mosquitoes will eventually adapt to the introduced strains of Wolbachia and be able to produce? I don't know that they would necessarily adapt to the introduced strains. I'm not sure how they would, because if they're not, when they, I guess it would be more, your question would be like, is there any possibility that at some point the strain that's here, the wild strain that's here, could somehow eventually be compatible with what we're using? I don't think that's very likely, but one of the other things you have to be aware of, it would be if you accidentally introduced a female, and that's why the sex sorting process is really important, because if you accidentally introduced a female that had the new Wolbachia strain in it, and they mated with the males, then you would be starting that over. But they would be successfully reproducing with that different strain. given the size, the scale of the landscape we're talking about, I think that's probably unlikely. But other places that have looked at that question have basically said, well, okay, if that happens, then you develop a different strain. So if you ended up with one that was not working anymore, then you could probably fairly easily develop another strain that was incompatible. If that makes sense. Yes, and Allison, I love that it would be non-biting male mosquitoes to be introduced. The males don't bite. And so I think a lot of people, what? You're releasing 1 million mosquitoes, but they would be the non-biting males. Can Wolbachia jump from one insect species to another? There can be what we'd call horizontal transmission, but I think it's fairly rare. And even, yeah, I think it is fairly rare. Is there any action that would be helpful to expedite federal involvement without interfering with appropriate scientific review? What you could do is let us know that, I don't know about expediting, but when we get to those places, those points in time where we're going through that regulatory process, the thing you can do is to weigh in publicly and say, yes, we want this. Is the goal eradication of Culex species? As Lissa pointed out in her presentation, there's that curve where you can eradicate early on. Obviously, mosquitoes are no longer in that lower part of the curve, so it's more control in targeted areas. I think the only way you would get to potential eradication would be if you were going to a gene drive approach, and that's not what we're doing. Is there any males feed on flower nectar? Females may also feed on the flower nectar, so they feed on other things as well, but they need that jolt of protein from the blood in order to make their eggs. They need that infusion. Okay, well, thanks everybody. This is great. It's just, I also want to say that I know that these workshops have been going on for a while, and I've always wanted to sit in on them because they're so interesting and you learn so much from them. So it's been my pleasure to be a part of this and also just to get in to sit and hear about all the wonderful work that's done by our partners. Yes, there are genetic editing approaches that are under study at UH and elsewhere in the world. Awesome, thanks.
Awesome, thank you, Teya. That was amazing. We appreciate you being here and your time.
My pleasure.
There's lots of comments about thank yous in the chat. So that's the conclusion of our formal presentations. I guess I actually have just a little bit information to share with you guys. And then we also have a quick follow-up poll that we would appreciate you guys staying on and filling out. But I think throughout our presentations today, we've heard some examples of what you can do to help protect our islands. There's the 643 pest that I think Sabrina shared and talked about. There's the rapid ohia death awareness that Lissa talked about. And then there's various other ways that we can all kind of reduce our footprints on the island. We talked about the proper tire disposal and making sure that you're taking care of your pets and not releasing them out onto the landscape, things like that. I'm gonna leave this up here for a little bit and let you guys do the poll so that you guys can kind of read through this and think through this and then also do the poll at the same time, because a lot of times it's difficult to listen and answer questions at the same time. So again, I appreciate you guys taking the time to answer this post-training assessment. This is kind of similar to the pre-training one that you guys did either before you got onto this or right when you got onto it. This kind of helps us see if you guys learned anything and kind of allows us to also improve our presentations if you guys didn't learn anything. There's a second poll after this one, so you guys can continue to stay on as we wait for people to answer these questions. About half of you have completed. And then these are just some other ways that you can contribute, especially to the different conservation organizations here on the island and across our state. There's so many different organizations to get involved with. We have a great page with volunteer opportunities on Maui, and some of those places aren't accepting volunteers right now because of COVID, but some of them might be, like Hawaiian Islands Land Trust, I know, is still having volunteers, and I think the Coral Reef Alliance is as well. And there's a resource page on our website, mauimauka.org/resources, and that has a bunch of links where there's all the infographics are up there as well. And we've got almost everybody in. We've got maybe one more. Oh, there we go, end polling. And just to kind of speed things up, I'm going to go right launch into the next poll. There's just 5 questions, and then we'll be done, and I might be able to share some of these poll answers with everybody. But sharing what you guys learned today is one of the most important kind of goals of this presentation, is to kind of teach the teachers. So if you can go out there and share this information with others and with any guests that you have, and I love the ideas of the, getting pet stores and landscapers and nurseries to know more about invasive species. And yes, asking our landlords to deal with tires and stuff like that can be difficult. So I appreciate that comment earlier. All right, we've just got a few more people left in the polling. I don't know if any of my co-hosts have anything else to add. I don't know if there's any other upcoming workshops to notify anybody about. I know there's a rapid ohia death workshop that's being done throughout, I think this month and next month. Well, that's it. Thank you, everybody, for being here, and we welcome any email feedback or info@mauimauka.org. Feel free to chat with us on Facebook as well.
And as a reminder, you guys will get a confirmation email with all the links and stuff in it. And again, if you want that certificate of completion, just reply to that and we'll make one for you and send it to you. But I want to thank you guys all for your time and joining us. And we do about 4 of these a year. So we do 2 in the spring. This was our second one. And we'll look to do 2 more in the fall. So we kind of skip the summer months because that tends to be busy for tour guides. But please share this if you guys know anybody that works with tourists or in the tourism industry, and let them know that we're doing these so we can get the word out. That'd be super awesome. All right, if there's no more questions, thank you, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you for
joining us.
attending. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Bye.
Hi, Teya. Thank you for
Thank you.
coming.